one of the things I'm finding, Daryl, when I'm doing this, you have to let people know, give them a little bit of housekeeping, a little house cleaning before you go on. So,
Okay.
Robert and everybody, as you come on, please go to Santita Jackson and Friends, Santita Jackson and Friends. That is the only place where I can get new friends on Facebook. The Santita Jackson page, they're kicking people off, about 1,000 of you every month. And it's been happening for a long time. So please go to Santita Jackson and Friends and like and share this show. I need you to like the show because it helps us algorithmically. Please do that, Robert. Let everybody know that they need to like and share the show. And I'm on Blue Sky, santitajackson.bsky.social. Woo-hoo. Meet me over there and Santita Jackson Show and Santita J. And everybody turn everything down. We're coming up. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. I am really, really excited to be talking with you. There is a lot going on. We, of course, have planned to talk about, and we will talk about this explosive report about the Memphis Police Department, the Department of Justice, that uses excessive force. I mean, they have the jump out boys. They have all kinds of things that you cannot even imagine. The Black community, in particular in Memphis and a majority Black city, have been living in mortal fear of the police. And now it's documented by the Department of Justice. And let's talk about that because as we're speaking, as we're recording this show right now, hey, Bernadette, hey, and Robert Shalom, we are watching the arrest of the CEO killer of Brian Thompson. 26-year-old Ivy League graduate, indeed. Attorney Darrell Jones from the Transformative Justice Coalition, the chair, of course, host of his show with Attorney Barbara Arwine every Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time on WOL. And of course, Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, wife, mother, assistant to Reverend Jesse Jackson, executive director of the Push for Excellence program, and she is also a pastor, my goodness, and a lawyer. Whoa. I mean, I don't know how you have time to do it all, but you've done it all in a spectacularly well way. We can compare and contrast what's happened, the terror under which Memphians have lived with the peaceful way that the most pursued man in America was apprehended today. So everybody, please go to Blue Sky at santitajackson.bsky.social. Become my friend there. I'm going to become active there. I am becoming more active at Santita J on Twitter and the Santita Jackson Show on Twitter. At Santita J is much easier for me, so just go over there. And then I'm sharing this with the Reverend Jesse Jackson Senior page. We're streaming there right now. And the Santita Jackson and Friends page. The Santita Jackson and Friends page. It's also streaming on the Santita Jackson page, but I can only get friends on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. So let's get right to it. Carol Soskin, my sister from another mister. How you doing, sweetie? We're coming up into Hanukkah, my sisters. Right now. I love it. I love it. I love it. So everybody, let's talk about what's happened in Memphis. Let's talk about consent decrees. Most of us who are not lawyers don't know what consent decrees are. We hear these phrases bandied about, Attorney Jones and Reverend Dr. Wilson Esquire. We don't know what they mean. We don't know how they protect us. We don't even know the questions that we need to be asking if we or a loved one has to go to jail. We don't know. And many of us don't know proper police procedure, right? And we're always told you need to comply. Comply with what? With harassment, physical harassment, sexual assault. I mean, all these things do happen. So let's talk about this and compare it and contrast it with the peaceful way in which young Luigi Mangione was apprehended. He is someone who killed one of the biggest executives in the world. Brian Thompson, the head of United Healthcare, the largest health insurance company in the United States. They make the most profits. They also have twice as many coverage denials as the industry rate. And the corporate media have been misreporting this story. They have said that Americans are gleeful about the killing of this man. No, no. Americans have been mournful about coverage denials when they've got cancer, when they have got life-threatening illnesses, when they have illnesses that where they are simply in pain. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and he said, "I need knee surgery. I have been fighting my insurance company for half a year." So he's been on painkillers. You do know that when you take all of these medicines, you can wreak havoc with your liver, with various parts of your body. I mean, a lot of people are struggling out here. So we need to talk about all of this. But in the meantime, I mean, and at the same time, let's look at the Memphis police. According to Reuters, the Memphis Police Department uses excessive force, I'm reading from this report, and discriminates against Black people in particular, the U.S. Department of Justice said last week, following an investigation. The federal investigation began in July of 2023 in the wake of the beating death of Black motorist Tyree Nichols. Think about this, everybody. Reverend Wilson, Attorney Jones, to beat someone to death not only requires intentionality, that's a lot of violence. Mm-hmm. The human body can take a lot of punishment to beat someone to death. I just want you to envision that, everybody, because I don't want us to go past that. So the Memphis police conduct, according to this report, unlawful stops, searches, and arrests. They discriminate in responses to people with behavioral health disabilities, people with mental health issues who really don't need a visit from the police as much as they might need a visit from a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a social worker. And on and on and on it goes. And then something called the Jump Out Boys, where they really form gangs. Let me start with you, Reverend Dr. Wilson. They form gangs and they jump out on people, beat them, arrest them. I mean, what is going on in Memphis, Tennessee?
Well, I think that in Memphis, like many major cities, and Attorney Darrell knows this, the police target certain communities within those cities. Whenever there's a crime that occurs, they already know where they're going to go to search for the perpetrator of the crime. Certain communities are on the hotspot. In Chicago, you have 12 communities where most violence occurs. That is in every major city in the United States. And so there are these particularly special forces that are gang crime units in police departments. They tend not to follow traditional police procedures. They have a cult of their own. They're almost like a gang. They dress in non-police uniforms, so they appear to be undercover. They dress like gang members in that particular locality. And so they can merge in with what they consider to be the potentially dangerous population of violent people. And so you have that within the police department, and they operate separate and apart from those who are stopping routine traffic stops and so forth. The other thing I would caution everyone, do not go to the police station and surrender alone. You need a witness that you went to the police station and that you were taken in and you looked a certain way. I never let my clients surrender without me when I practice criminal law, because I remember I was representing gang members, and so I went to my client, had me called, and I went to the police station. I said, and I want to see my client right now. And so they said, sure. I said, I want to see him before you do anything, because I want to be the witness to how he looked before he was taken in. And that seems very simple. That's why I remember Saturday we talked about retired Congressman Bobby Rush, who was a Panther. He surrendered to your father publicly at Operation Breadbasket on the stage. That's how he lived.
No, we surrendered him to the police.
Yeah.
He surrendered himself to my parents' apartment. And,
they
yeah,
had the police come to
yeah.
Operation Breadbasket, which was a public forum protecting him from what could have happened.
Uh,
Because remember, his partner had
mhm.
already, two of his partners had already been murdered.
Well, but if I could add this too, we also had Renault Robinson, whom we should not forget.
Never forget.
Never forget. And he was head, of course, the founder of the African American Police Officers Association, right? And so
Right.
he was on stage that day as well. He had uncovered, he was among the first batch of black police officers in Chicago when they were hired, when they were hiring them. And he did something very brave. Attorney Jones, I'm going to pivot right back to you, Reverend Wilson, but I just think it needs to be said because he just passed away not too long ago.
Right.
He went onto the force, a hostile white force, and saw the corruption and uncovered it immediately, which of course put him in danger. He saw what they were doing to black people, and he went public with it. And so he was an ally, a law and order guy, but an ally. So he was on stage with Reverend Jackson and others that day, and we surrendered Bobby Rush to him.
And the thing is, if you talk to many African American police officers, they face friendly fire and fire from the offender that they're chasing or trying to find. So the African American Patrolmen's League was a safety net for Black police officers in Chicago. And then you have the National Association of Black Law Enforcement, because there is an attack not just on the community, but on those Black officers who are on the force. They also are targeted. So one is you don't surrender alone because you need a witness. The second thing, what happened in Memphis is not unusual. There are police departments and special force teams that engage in what the Department of Justice called patterns and practice of illegal, unconstitutional conduct when they are seeking to charge some, seeking to find a criminal as such, quote unquote, when they want to effectuate an arrest. They engage in all sorts of, many of them, in all sorts of illegal behavior. They beat the suspect by saying that he threatened them within an inch of their life. And the list just goes on and on. Just for example, in certain communities, you will see an increased number of police stops. They'll say the tail light was out on the vehicle. That's why they stopped him. And then they searched the vehicle. You're not supposed to just randomly search cars. So you have all of these practices occurring in targeted communities where most of the violence occurs. And so the police feel emboldened to just go into certain neighborhoods and pick people up. And if you've ever had a record, you're the first ones they look for. Even though you served your time and you're dumped back in the same community where you were taken from, you will be the first on their radar to pick up, to question, to interrogate. They even take teenagers, kids that don't know anything. If something happens in a school neighborhood, one year they arrested all of these kids that were leaving school, took them to police stations across the city of Chicago, chained them, handcuffed them to the wall. Now you got 15, 16-year-old kids who are fearing for their lives. The police are saying, just here, write this statement down and we'll let you go. All sorts of intimidating things that happen every single day in police departments across the country. Now, I think Attorney Darrell can fast forward to Memphis and give some details. He knows about it in Baltimore too.
Well, you know what I would like to ask both of you as we make this pivot, because I think it's important for us to know that this is not just particular or peculiar, if you will, to Memphis, that this is a nationwide problem and it's actually a worldwide problem. Because the oppressed are the poor. The oppressed are the vulnerable wherever you go. And so while it's racialized in America, it's normalized behavior with police all over the world. And I think it's important for us to know that, because I know we have people who tune in from all over the world. And I want you to know that we are hearing you, seeing you, feeling you. But what's striking about this Memphis Police Department also, Attorney Jones and Reverend Dr. Wilson, is that it's more than 50% black.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
we did not fight. And mind you, this was really my parents' fight, but my parents took my brothers, my sister, and I on the picket lines. So we were that's why I can remember seeing Uncle Bobby on that stage with Renault Robinson and my father and Calvin Morris and Reverend Barrow with Aunt Lucille in the wings, Mrs. Lucille Conway Loman. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Mike Knighton and Fats Crawford. Oh, double O. I mean, I'm thinking of all the people who were lining the stage and who were security also. We didn't do all of this marching and fighting and dying for black people to go on the police force and suddenly turn blue. I mean, how can you? This is such a stinging indictment for
Well,
this to happen in Memphis, Reverend Wilson.
well, it's interesting, but remember, Memphis is where Dr. King was murdered.
Yeah.
Memphis is a southern town. It's in the state of Tennessee, where I was born in Tennessee, and the vigilante type police forces that we are seeing today, they existed before now, and they continue to exist. These are paramilitary units within legally authorized police departments, where they take it upon themselves to enforce justice as they see it, whenever they arrive on the scene. Just like the young man that shot the kid on the west side, the Jump Out Boys. They killed a guy who exited a vehicle, was lying on the ground, and they shot him several times with the intent to kill. The same thing that happened with 16 shots in a cover up of a kid walking on the street, Laquan McDonald. Just walking around, perhaps high, we don't know. They never did a test. They simply, and the cop that arrived on the scene was not called to the scene. He wasn't assigned to be there. He took himself there with the intent of committing murder. And you see this happening in Memphis. It's just, it's even more horrific.
Attorney Jones, what help us give us the overview of this report. And yes, the background, well, I mean, not even the background, I mean, part of the foundation is that I think people would be shocked to know that half of the police force are black. I mean, so I just have no words for it. I mean,
No,
and
you're absolutely right.
I'm not saying, for the audience, I don't want you to think that I believe that black people are morally superior. No. I do believe, though, and I think that's our disappointment in the Middle East, that when you have been through a horror, you're supposed to become better, not bitter. And you're supposed to come out of it a better a better person. You might not be well, but you should be better, and you should be committed to not mistreating people as you have been mistreated. Right? Help me with this this report. I mean,
Well, it's it's a fantastic premise that you've laid out, that you shouldn't, when you've coming out of being mistreated, you shouldn't want to have others put in a situation where you are coming out of, where you're mistreating them. But we know historically that happens, right? We can take it all the way back to slavery, right? Where we had blacks that were the kitchen help, or the house Negroes that thought they were better than the field Negroes and all of that. So we know that there's always been a division that exists when it comes to empowering people and giving them power. They then have the ability to try to look down on someone. This parallels what happened in Memphis. So, in Memphis, their police department is what, 56% African American. All right. So it's 56% African American. But what happens is when you start becoming part of that blue family, and behind the blue shield, there's a sense of entitlement, a sense of power that they then have, and they want to look out for one another and have each other's back. And so when we start unfolding all of this, that's when we start realizing. I think Reverend was talking about the jump out boys that are in Chicago. There are jump out boys that are in Baltimore. There's Red Dog Unit.
Okay, jump out boys, Red Dog Unit, because I'm just finding out what they are. So I know there's some other people who don't know. What are jump out boys?
Yeah, and what this is, it's a section within the police department that they create. And what this unit is intended to do is to go into these rough or bad areas, crime-ridden areas, and they're permitted to use excessive force in order to meet what they believe is the nasty forces that are there, so that they can make arrests and contain an area, can go into an area and invoke fear into the residents of the area, because they felt as though if the people fear them, then the people will respect them and not commit the crimes. We can stop them by making them fear us. They'll fear us when we come in with our paramilitary equipment, when we come out and we're jumping out and we're taking innocent people and we're trying to look for drugs. We have no reasonable basis. Typically, you need reasonable, articulable suspicion and all this, all this other legal jazz in order to stop somebody. But what the jump out boys or the Red Dog Unit would do is that, you know what? I bet you this dude has some drugs on him. He's in this area. It's a bad area. It's a poor area. We know there's drug dealing going on. We ain't seen him do nothing, but let's check him out. And so they will go and stop him for no reason other than he's walking down the street in this community. And then would proceed to necessarily take him to the ground, go through his pockets, things along those lines, trying to get something illegal out of him. And so, when you get to the jump out boys and the Red Dog Unit, all of that is an outgrowth of that. All of that is what they're calling their enforcement mentality. And let me say this, it's not limited to Chicago. It's not limited to Maryland or Baltimore. It's not limited to Memphis. Folks tend to forget just about a year or so ago, there was something called the Brave Cave that existed. And the Brave Cave was a place that was an abandoned building that was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And the Baton Rouge, Louisiana Special Task Force would go and gather people, right? These brothers and sisters, young folks generally, take them to the Brave Cave, and it was just abandoned on the inside. There'd be a chair there. They would beat them. They would tie them down, trying to get information about crimes, trying to find other things that they could use to go back in the community to, go forward with their law enforcement and their investigations and that kind of stuff. This exists. This is happening. What the Department of Justice is touching on here in Memphis is they're saying that we need to stop the activities that are going on there. We need to stop the stop and frisk. By stop and frisk, what do we mean? Just what I just said earlier. You're walking down the street, you're minding your own business. You're going to visit Aunt B, right? Because you haven't seen her in a long time. And Aunt B just happens to live in a neighborhood that's now a heavy drug area or heavy crime area. They stop you because they see you walking down in this area and they don't think you belong. And they frisk you because they think you're probably going to have some illegal drug or something on you. That's what the stop and frisk is all about. So that's a large... I'm sorry.
I was going to say, part of that is they not only stop you walking, they stop you driving or biking.
Exactly. That's where you get all the driving while black, biking while black, watching dogs while black. All of that is an outgrowth of that. And one of the fears here, Santita, is that, in Memphis, the city officials there are fighting the finding of the Department of Justice. They're saying that the Department of Justice only took 17 months to do this investigation, and that any other investigation takes 2 or 3 years. Well, I'll tell you why they only did it for 17 months. It was so offensive there in Memphis, it didn't take that long to see all the racism that was coming through and dripping through the Memphis Police Department. The real question now becomes, why are they dragging their legs? Dragging their legs. Why is the Memphis Police Department, why is the city attorney now trying to slow everything down? I'll tell you why. Because they know they have an administration, and the Trump administration that's coming in, that's already said we're law enforcement. They've already said we want to bring stop and frisk back. They've already said we want to empower the police in the communities. In other words, they won't have to worry about the lawsuits under the Trump administration that's coming in, because they're doing exactly what they want them to do.
And they'll be able to continue, and there'll be no penalties. What will happen under the
No penalties.
following that line of logic? Because they have announced that. What do you expect? What will happen with this report, with this incoming administration?
Well, they'll ignore the report. They will dismiss it as having no factual basis, and they will continue to allow these kinds of stop and frisk and behaviors to escalate. And so people are going to see what it means to be in a contained community, what it means to have your freedoms marginalized, where your ability to go in and out of your neighborhood is going to be restricted without fear of being arrested, detained, beaten, and nothing will happen. Nobody will be able to object because the feds are not overseeing anymore. And so these local police departments will have free reign. We have, like he says, they had a abandoned building in Louisiana. They have these places where they can take and torture people all over the country.
Like Coleman Square in Chicago.
Coleman Square.
Exactly.
Which is based on a CIA black site.
Absolutely.
Would you explain that, Reverend Dr. Wilson? Because that sounds so crazy. Are you chiming? It's okay. But that sounds so crazy.
Well, it is crazy, but the thing is, it is happening and has happened over time. It continues to happen, and we've had it reduced when you have a state attorney general, a U.S. attorney general that is concerned about rights of public rights, individual rights, protecting individual liberties. And when we talk about liberty, your freedom to walk in your neighborhood and not be stopped, frisked, arrested, and detained by police.
Wait a minute, you mean like Dr. Henry Louis Gates, who was in Cambridge, and the police did not believe that that this was his house.
That he should have lived there, that he had a right to be there.
I mean, and they said, maybe he had something to drink. You're at home. You do whatever you want at home.
And I'm saying, I don't think people...
And that's it. I'm like, no, you've got to address the systemic. Black folks walk through their neighborhoods all the time that are affluent, and people want to know what you're doing there. Like when you get on a plane in business or first class, and the white passengers want to see your ticket.
Yep. I was on a panel with a lady that worked for a major corporation, and she lived in a predominantly white suburb of the city. And she said she had not explained to her sons about driving while black. Mm-hmm. And so her son gets his little driver's license. He's all excited. He's driving, not committed any crime. He's not violating anything other than he's driving while black. He gets stopped and he shows his address, and the cop said, "You couldn't possibly live here." So now he is taken to the station. He didn't beat him, but the reality is he could not drive in his own neighborhood because he was black. Mm-hmm. And he was humiliated and all sorts of things, and he could have been hurt. She was just thankful that they didn't beat him or cause him any harm, but the indignity of, I can't be who I am in my neighborhood, wherever I live. And I think go ahead, Daryl.
Yeah, and with the indignity, sometimes I think folks miss another piece that I think is a huge piece that's there. There's a psychological component that comes along with this. When this 16-year-old boy has this or a 16-year-old child has this happen to them, letting them know that you don't belong here. This ain't you. I'm questioning your legitimacy in terms of what you can be and who you are and what you can own. That has a psychological component to it that stays with that kid, that stays with his family, that he's going to talk about it with his friends. That whole sphere of influence is going to be influenced from that interaction that he's now had. That's what's happening in Memphis with regards to these stops and frisk, and all the violence that's there. It's having that impact on the community. And the question, it seeps so deeply into the community that you start the anticipatory compliance. What do I mean by anticipatory compliance? It means that rather than do something you legally have the right to do, you don't want someone to question your ability to do it, so you don't do it at all, even though you could have done it. Anticipatory compliance. That's problematic. That's problematic. And that's what is happening every time we hear about a Tyree Nichols. And I can only imagine the number of Tyree Nichols that we've never heard of. We've never heard of. The impact that that's having in those communities. That's what this is about. And I tell you, when we talk about Tennessee, particularly Memphis and Tennessee and the state, we then say, well, what's the answer to it? What is the answer? Here we see it happening in Tennessee. We hear it happening across the country. What is the answer to it? And part of the answer, Santita, has got to be, has been the consent decrees that were being entered into, and sort of backing up to one of your initial questions about what is a consent decree. It is an agreement that is entered into generally with the Department of Justice, meaning the Attorney General for the United States, as well as a police department or lawyers for the police department, and it's overseen by a judge or a similar situated individual. And that if they come up with a long-range plan, 5, 10 years, whatever it may be, as to how they're going to monitor and watch what the police department is doing so they can address any bad behaviors that are going on or discriminatory behaviors that are going on. And if they're not in compliance, and they have reviews, if they're not in compliance, then they can be fined and other things can happen. So what now is happening is that with the first Trump administration, they were against consent decrees. So you had an Obama administration, President Obama administration, that went in and was really pushing consent decrees all across the country to be certain that they could address some of the wrongs being done to the communities of color. You had the Trump administration that then came in that said, we're not going to push this stuff. No, And now they're coming back with the second Trump administration that's saying the same thing, taking it a step further, saying, matter of fact, y'all do what you need to do to stop these people from committing crimes and doing things in these communities. We need to clean all of this up. That's what the consent decree actually is and what it does. And, the fear now is that communities like cities like Memphis, what they will now do is that they're slow walking this. They're slow walking. They're like, no, we're not going to do this. We're not. Why? Because they know they have an administration that's coming in place that will not have an attorney general that's going to say, I want this consent decree to continue to be in place. The consent decrees that are in place, they simply won't enforce them. The Attorney General's office just say, whatever. We're not going to push it. We're going to be silent on it. Do what you want. We're cool. Hey, thumbs up. Get them.
But Virginia.
But there's one thing they can do, Santita. Attorney Jones, we're in a states' rights movement, and so that means.
So what does that mean?
That means that the state legislatures, the state legislators, the governor of the states have the right to make their own rules state by state. And so we're going to have to look and act state by state. We're going to have to really act locally. We have a state attorney general. We have to push our state attorney general to engage in initiating consent decrees and investigating patterns and practices. Now, the problem you have is we have never paid attention, as we should, to who's elected to the state attorney general office, and we don't pay attention to state legislative bodies, state senators and state reps. But we're going to have to look. Every 2 years, the state reps run for office. Every 4 years, every 6 years, the state senators are elected. So we have to begin to focus locally on these state attorney generals and these state legislative bodies, because otherwise every city is just doing whatever they want to do, or every county. You have county sheriffs. We haven't looked at those as we should.
Well, and we haven't looked at how active we need to be in our own organizations. I mean, John Holloman is making the point about Sandra Bland,
Hmm.
Mm.
victim of power. She was a victim of sexism. She was a victim of being a black woman who had agency over herself, and she dare ask, "What are you doing?
Hmm.
How dare you speak to me this way? What were you?" And when I mean, Daryl, you've touched me as you talk about our children, but I tell you what, we're not arming our children. We're not forewarning our children.
Hmm.
With it, we're letting our children believe that they have freedoms that they have not earned, freedoms that they don't fight for which they do not fight. Should I say to be grammatically correct? And so they get caught out here by their unawares. They really think we shield our children from the fight and the struggle because I don't want my child to experience what I experienced. Jewish parents don't do that with their children.
They tell them about the Holocaust.
They tell them about the struggle over the millennia, and
Yeah.
they say now this is you, and they arm them for the fight. And whatever you say about them, and people have plenty to say, so much of it wrong. What you cannot say is that they do not organize their children to fight every generation. See, the thing is, all the fight's going to do is make you stronger. It's going to make you sharper. Our children, they don't know. I mean, they think that that Kamala Harris just got here and that Obama just got here. They don't know that on the day that Reverend Jesse Jackson announced that he was running for the presidency, and these folks knew it was serious because he's one of the three most admired men in the world in the United States. They knew that. He said, as of this day, nothing is the same. And as you remember, Reverend Wilson, because we were sitting backstage getting ready to go out on the stage, and John Bustamante, his lead attorney, was negotiating with the Department of Treasury because he had to get his Secret Service protection. Was it that night? They met him, I think, in New Hampshire.
Hmm.
Reverend he was the most threatened candidate in history. Nobody has given us any, and that's just the presidency. We had lived with that. Noble and these black police officers used to protect Reverend all over the country because he was threatened all the time. I mean, I'm just informally they did that for Dr. King, and when it was formalized, they would literally withdrew the protection for him just as he was coming into Memphis, and that got him, and then he was killed. I mean, what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that these things should happen, Daryl and Reverend Wilson, but we've got to turn a minus into a plus and help our children to understand that, wait a minute, you're strong enough for the fight, but a fight is what you will have. If you think that your freedom was given to you, oh, no, buddy, you got to earn this. And Daryl, you got to earn it all the time.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I agree with you. We have failed to properly train a generation. One, they don't know their history and they don't understand where they are. And so, I knew about youth movements across the world when I was a teenager because we read about it, we were taught about it. And we have to know that this is not a new struggle. It's just they wear different uniforms, but it's the same struggle. These kids haven't even read about the Klan. And now the Klan is in a pinstripe suit, a blue. If you're in Chicago, they wear blue or
what you
black.
say, James Cole Esquire?
Yeah.
I mean, my all due respect to both of the lawyers on the panel.
No, but that's the new Klan, and we have to understand that white supremacy has not left America.
And and all skin folk ain't kinfolk.
No.
I mean, what did you say? 56% of the police force in Memphis are black. So this is a cultural problem.
But you remember, we had people in the civil rights organization in Operation Push. Police officers infiltrated our meetings. Breadbasket and Operation Push.
And then I'm saying it started in Breadbasket.
Started in Breadbasket with the Red Squad.
Yeah.
And so we've always had people who wore the blue but turned against their own people.
Well,
And so,
'cause as you recall, one of them, I mean, he was found out,
yeah.
and then, I mean, part of Howard Pointer's legacy, and he wanted it to be, he said, the more time I spent with Reverend Mrs. Jackson, you kids, and the Push family, the breadbasket family that became the Push family, I had he was like one of our lead ushers,
Yeah.
Black Pushing. He said, I had opportunities to kill him, but I couldn't do it. He said, I knew what time you all went to school. I understood your mother's movements. I knew every room in your house and how you moved because that was my job,
Hmm.
you know. But, and when our people found out, they were very angry and they wanted to do harm to him. And my father would not let that happen. He said, I think he's had a change of heart, but that's how my father is. And Howard had a change of heart, and he became one of our closest people. And he would tell us how police operate. But then I don't want to take away from some really good officers who don't have the space to push back, Daryl, against the corruption in the system. I mean, how can we ever root it out if you can't report on it, Daryl?
Hmm.
I mean, there's no consistency here. The Biden administration, okay, I can get the report out. The Trump administration gets swept under the rug. And I tell you what, if we allow that to happen, it's our fault. Because though the Biden administration only responded to our political pressure, they didn't give us anything. We need to stop acting as if this administration has given us things. First of all, we gave him the presidency. So you're doing what I was due. Charity does not work in politics. That's not how this works. That's not how power works. So, I mean, where do we go from here? Well, I mean, what do we do?
So, Santita, I think there are a couple of things, and everything that both have said have been very accurate. And of course, with our young folk, I'm crazy about our young folk because it was because of our young people that we have these activists that were out there that we got so close to having a George Floyd Justice and Policing pass. It's because of the young people that we saw all these Confederate statues coming down. It was because of the young people that we've seen the environmental legislation that has now come into pass. So, I don't write off our young activists that are there. They are there, they're in place, and they're pushing hard. They're learning the history. They're the ones that were behind when George Floyd was murdered. They're the ones who got out in the street during that COVID and got all that started when we're pushing forward. So, I think that our young folk certainly have the drive and the desire. They have to be certain, though. We need to be certain that we're spilling into them what we know and our experiences so they can take and continue to build off of what our experiences have been. When we talk about Memphis in particular, we got to be careful because we're talking about the attorney generals and that's usually a really good strategy, but it varies state by state. So in the state of Tennessee, for instance, the attorney general is not elected. The attorney general is appointed by the judges, the Supreme Court judges in.
How does that work? Talk to me.
Yeah, I don't begin to try to explain their system. Right. I can only tell you that their justices appoint the attorney general for the state of Tennessee. So he's not an elected person. So he doesn't have to answer to the people. Right. That's not how that's happening. The judges are appointed by the governor. Right, in the state of Tennessee. And so if you're looking at the legislature in the states of Tennessee, you're talking about a very conservative legislature. So, I say all of that to say that on the federal and the state level for Memphis, it ain't happening. The protection ain't going to be there. Their best course of action in a situation like Memphis is locally. Their local prosecutor, right? Their local mayor. It's their mayor that selects the chief of police. It's the chief of police that puts into practice the policy that the police department is to follow. So in the city of Memphis, it's so incredibly important to have a mayor that is responsive to the issues of the people. And that's where the rubber meets the road there, is that they've got to be certain that they have a mayor that gets it. A city attorney that gets it, that's not trying to say, no, 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 don't let the Department of Justice come in here. Don't let the Federal Attorney General's office come in here to talk about a consent decree. They need to have a mayor and a city attorney that says, yeah, come on in, we need you. And the only way that happens is with the citizens of Memphis standing up and being certain that their mayor, their city attorney represents their interests and represents them and has their best interest at heart. That's where I think the answer lies in a situation like Memphis. As Reverend Wilson was saying, in other states, Maryland and I guess Illinois, where they have elected attorney generals, that then, yeah, you can go to the attorney general and have them do it. You can go to the state legislature and have them do it. But when you don't have either of those, it becomes a local issue. And you've got to bring it home and protect your home turf. You may not be able to protect the entire state of Tennessee, but you can protect the city of Memphis. And that's where I think part of that focus has got to be, Santita.
Well, but I think that's why, because I certainly didn't imply, and I don't want anyone to infer that I don't think our young people are active. But what we're not doing is organizing in mass. Mm-hmm. And that's because a thin layer of them, which is great, that's important. But our parents came through an era of mass action where James Bevel and Diane Nash Bevel went into Alabama and organized all of the school children and energized all of the school children in Birmingham. I mean, it takes that kind of, and what Reverend Bevel and Diane Nash Bevel did was they had training sessions for all of the children. That became a real thing. It became a real badge of honor to be arrested and to march and on and on and on. And we've got to do that kind of work. Because if we do not, that's what, my Jewish friends, all my friends, they were going to Hebrew school. And I know I grew up in our equivalent of Hebrew school, because I grew up in Breadbasket and Push, because every Saturday they almost had like a track for the kids to learn our history. And to be on the picket lines. It's going to take that kind of mass action, because you got to teach your children. That's part of the talk also.
Yeah.
Because there's some things I remember. We were riding down the street and this police officer was out of order. And my brother, my baby brother, Yusuf, made some little, kind of looked at this officer, and, it's like, how dare you? And my mother, boy, I thought she was going to jump in that front seat and hit him upside his head. She said, boy, have I not taught you anything? Do you know what you're doing? I know we're in Washington, D.C. Don't you feel that free? Because we know that there's a mentality, right? And I think we've got to deal with that too. John Holloman, he is real. Sandra Bland, as really, he has been on that for quite a moment. John, why don't you write to us? What is it? Because it appears that, well, you know what, I guess because she was a woman, and what they said happened to her, it didn't happen that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's so painful, that, these people are doing so much lying, and so many people.
Well, one of the things, Santita, I think I used to teach high school students in particular, and college students, you have a right to remain silent when you're stopped by the police. You have to give them your name, and
you do have to.
You do have to give them your name and social security number. You don't have to admit to anything. You don't have to explain anything. You have a right to ask for a lawyer. Most people start talking as soon as they stop. They're frustrated. They're angry. They want to curse the police out. They want to ask them a whole lot. You don't have a right to do all that talking. You have a right to remain silent. That is a right, and we need to exercise that right. You can
call for a lawyer. If you don't have money, most of us don't have access to it.
Generally, they will let you make one call at the police station. They may. But whatever they do, there's no point in doing all that talking, because if they're going to beat you, they're going to beat you anyway. And talking does not help your case. You cannot try your case on the street. You have to wait until you get before a judge. And that's difficult. I know most people in traffic stops, they immediately want to explain what happened. You don't have to. Don't explain. Don't talk.
Your mouth is your worst enemy.
It is.
You know, and it's one of the things that folks, and unfortunately, when you're dealing with the Memphis and the Brave Cave and some of the other places, you know, they don't really care about your rights. They're going to be, you know, doing what they want to do to try to get you to talk. But most typically, as you were saying, Reverend Wilson, I always tell my clients all the time that if the officer asks you for consent to do something, it's because they don't think they have a right to do it. If they thought they had the right to search it, they wouldn't be asking you, they would be searching it. They wouldn't ask you, can I search it? So, you know, if they ask you for consent, just say no. You know, I'm not going to give you consent. And then if they don't think they have the right to do it, they should leave you alone. If they do think they have the right to do it, they're going to do it anyway. So don't make it easy by just giving them the consent. No, if they have the right to do it, they're going to do it. Don't give up the ship. But when we're dealing with a lot of the communities that we're talking about here, some of the areas where we have the jump out squads and jump out boys and Red Dog Unit and all the other you know, paramilitary groups that are going there to inflict fear into the communities, they're not going to be concerned about whether or not you're giving consent anyway. In Baltimore, they had a unit that was a gun task force. The gun task force had guns they were planting after they got the people they wanted to get. So, and planting drugs, you know, and all of this was in existence. So, you know, and they're all part of these Red Dog Unit type mentalities. The one thing I did want to lift up, Santita, because I want to be certain that people are aware of this with regards to Memphis, and we talk about patterns in practice. Patterns in practice also apply to policing. And that's the reason that we talked about when officers are found to be bad officers, that there should be a list that exists that this officer is on, that this is an officer that's an indicators of bad behavior. So Saralyn Davis, who is the police chief now down in Memphis, Tennessee, during all of the Tyree Nichols stuff, she was also head of that Red Dog unit in Atlanta, Georgia. The same practices that they kicked her out of because of Atlanta, Georgia, and their practices, she brought it to Memphis. And so that's what you're seeing now. There should be a listing so that the elected officials that are appointing these police chiefs and the other officials that have the opportunity to brief and give advice or consent on these police chiefs, that they can lift it up so that folks know, you know, what their background is and where they're coming from.
Well, the other thing we have to also look at, Attorney Jones, is the fact that all of the police are covered by the police union.
Mm-hmm.
And
FOP, fraternal.
FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, and we don't control the Fraternal Order of Police. And so when cities are negotiating police contracts, you have to have someone. We've been arguing here in Chicago that the community should be represented at the table, because they are negotiating against the interests of the public. And the police are protected and are represented by lawyers paid by the FOP. But they have a lot to do with the rules that the police departments across the country implement. And so we have to begin to look at what the police rules and orders are. We don't know in most cases until we're on the street.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I think ultimately, you know, Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman used to say, it works when you work it.
Yeah.
And we really need to understand the system that we're in. So many of us, you know, Reverend Jackson often says, remember, we were in slavery longer than we've been free.
Yeah.
We've not even had the right to vote, actually, 60 years. We're 1 year shy of that. Mm-hmm. So we're very new to this freedom, let alone the liberty experience. Mm-hmm. And so I urge patience, but I also urge diligence and a sense of urgency, because we are more than 250 years into this American experience and experiment. We are more than 400 years into, well, almost 500 years into this European project over on these shores, because we came here in 1532 with the Spaniards. So there's some things that we really, really need to figure out and work out. And teaching our history and training our children and helping them to create a more perfect union.
You must always understand the rules of engagement. If you join a
Absolutely.
gang, there are rules of engagement in the gang. And we have to teach our children what are the rules of engagement when
That's
you're on
right.
the street of the city, of the town, of the state. What, because I've had kids say, I have a right to, no, you don't. You don't have those certain rights you just don't have, but they make them up in their minds. And so we have to begin to teach. We used to teach street law because there's a law that you need to know while you're on the street, not in your home. You have certain rights and privileges while you're in your home. If someone invades your property, you have rights to protect the property. You don't have a right to shoot somebody on the doorstep if they're not inside. You know, that's why they had those cases, and Attorney Jones knows they dragged the person, the body on the inside of the house because you're protecting the property on the inside. I mean, just little things, nuances that we're going to have to make sure people understand the limitations of rights. Doesn't mean you don't have them, but you need to know there are limits to what you can and cannot do.
Well, what did LBJ say once the Voting Rights Act was signed? He said, now
Now make them.
Negro leaders, no, now Negro leaders go home and teach your people to become citizens.
Mm-hmm.
He said that. I said, ooh wee, how true. Because that's what we are.
And
And
we have to
citizens
meet.
have
I'm
rights.
sorry.
I've got like 30 seconds.
Well, I just think we need to meet with police superintendents in every community, meet with them, find out what are their search and seizure rules that they teach their officers.
Mm-hmm.
How do they train them? We need to be a part of the training protocols for police departments.
And teach our children how they are to interact and what their rights are.
Yep.
And we need to develop a database so that there is like a 911 number that all of our children can call so that they can be defended.
Yes.
We have 1-800, 866 our vote.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we need something like that
For
every day of the year for our children. Because there was a young girl, 17 years of age, who was on her way to the corner store with her 9-year-old cousin, who said, you know what? She saw this young man on the ground with the police.
Mhm.
And she said, no. She said, you go into that store and don't you come out until I come and get you. Darnella Frazier. She pulled out that phone and live streamed the killing of George Floyd. She was a child herself, but her lived experience told her that this was not going to end well.
Yeah.
Think about that, everybody. She was not a young lady. She was a child. That's what you are, 17. Think about that. Well, I love you both. And you know what? Tomorrow we will talk about the light skin. I'm sorry.
What light skin?
Well, yeah, he was, but that's not what they. My goodness, goodness gracious, it's going to be too rich, and it'll be interesting to see how this story plays out. Because one thing I will say, this young man who is alleged to have killed United Health CEO Brian Thompson, he was eating at McDonald's. He was not beaten. He was not choked. He was not shot. He was apprehended peaceably and brought into the station.
Did you say Dylan Roof?
Oh, you mean taking the Burger King? I'm sorry. He was hungry before they take him in. After you killed up all the people in the church. Well, there you go. Whew. All right, everybody. I love you. I'll see you tomorrow on
Thank
the
you.
Santita Jackson Show. Oh, God bless you.